Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D. I'm your host, Jessica, and with me this week we have our guest, Cezar. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So this week, we actually met on Facebook. We're in a group, which I think the name is a beggar talk one. So I'm begging you to play a game that's not D&D, which you can understand why I'm in that. And you posted about your game Insurgent on there,
Right.
which sounded very exciting with this rebellion and tyrannical kind of theme to it. And so I had to ask you on to come and talk to me about it. So thanks so much for your time and coming on. If you are listening or watching to the podcast, anything we're talking about, we will put links in the show notes for anything, so you can click and follow on there. And this week we are doing a pre-recording, but I'll be in the chat if you have any questions to answer live as well. So before we dig into the game and talk about the game and the mechanics, I would like to talk about you a little bit.
Right.
Because you're a little bit impressive as well when I was doing my research. So you, in the Tabletop Awards of 2022, you were a finalist as a designer of the year. You've been named one of the top 10 indie tabletop RPG designers to watch in 2022. So I wanted to talk a little bit about you and your background with games and how you got to where you are now. So what was the first memory you have of playing TTRPGs?
Well, I was 12, so I'm talking 1994. And a friend of mine said, let's go to our friend's house. He's got that's new game, and we roll dice and something like that. I thought it would be like another kind of board game or something like that. And we got there, and he had a kit called First Quest. It was a AD&D version, like an introductory kit for AD&D that was published in Brazil. And it came with pre-made character sheets on a cardboard with nice illustrations. And it came also with a CD that had parts of the narration of the adventure that would introduce like the atmosphere and the mood.
Nice.
And then it was super nice. And then after that, the GM picks up and continues narrating everything. And the GM was also a very good illustrator. So he would draw monsters and everything. So I sat there, 12 years old. I was the youngest at the table. And when those things started to click, oh my God, I'm immersed in a fantasy world. The audios, the music, the sounds of the dripping water in the dungeon and the monsters. I said, oh my God, this is what I like to do. I just didn't know that it existed. So yeah, I was hooked from the very beginning. We played a little bit of it. Of course, the promise of the game and the reality of what the mechanics allowed us was to do was very different, as you might expect from an AD&D experience. So from the very beginning, I thought, I think we can do this in a different way, perhaps a simpler way. So the spark of hacking stuff was with me from the very beginning. But we played First Quest for a while, and then went to D&D 3.5, and then some Brazilian RPGs as well. And here I am.
Amazing. So with the here I am. So you've been designing games for like 7 or 8 years now, I believe. How did you take that step to? I mean, like you say, it sounds like since you first played, you were thinking maybe we can tweak and maybe we can edit this. But when did you start creating games and sharing them with other people?
Well, that happened around 8 years ago, because although I started playing, as I said, more than 25 years ago, there was a big gap during college. I stopped playing after high school, and I couldn't find a group during college. And I just left it alone. I moved from my city, and I started living somewhere else. So I lost contact with the groups I had. So after we finished college, all my group of friends actually finished college around the same time. So we decided to give it another go, and we started playing D&D 4th edition. And then we stumbled upon some frustrations, mainly the thing that we wanted to feel like protagonists, like capable and competent heroes, but then the swinginess of the D20 system uh,
Mm,
left us frustrated with the results. And
yeah.
a friend of mine, which was he was particularly unlucky with dice rolls,
All
and
right.
he liked to play like this barbarian. And he said,
Mm-hmm.
I can't understand that I'm standing right in front of a goblin with a like a warhammer and I swing
Yeah.
it at it and I miss it. That doesn't make sense. So that got me
Mm,
thinking. There's gotta be different ways to explore these games.
mm-hmm.
So I started digging and I discovered Fate.
Oh yeah.
Actually, it's covered a simple hack of Fate that was called F
Mm-hmm.
sharp. It was like
Mm-hmm.
a 3-page doc online, and then I said, okay, this is perhaps I can use this and propose some changes to the game. But soon I realized that I would have to strip away pretty much the whole game and add the things that
Mm-hmm.
I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided, well, I can like write something that for us to play, something that would be easy to introduce new players to.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when I decided to give it a go. And I released my first game using Google Slides as my software of choice to lay out the
Perfect.
game.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I chose to do it on a like a mobile screen format so that you could read the game
Okay.
using your phone.
Sure.
So I actually saved this as a PDF, of course, but it was
Mm-hmm.
formatted to read on a screen. And I
Mm-hmm.
launched it in Brazil, and it got some traction. Of course, now
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't represent the kind of game designer I am. It's like early stuff that
Sure.
I made, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it kind of gives me like the authorization to create. So you know what, I can do that. I don't need a company, I don't need a
Mm-hmm.
printer, I don't need software. I can just type stuff on my computer and people might play it. So that was very liberating, and
Yeah.
I could never stop. I couldn't stop having ideas and tweaking and making games since then.
Well, that makes perfect sense because if anyone goes to your itch page, there is an awful lot of games available on there. So I'll put the link in the show notes and up in the chat now. So if you want to go have a look and see the whole range of games that you have there. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about kind of your latest game that I mentioned, Insurgent, that we want to talk about. But one thing I noticed about a lot of your games is they are quite, like you say, accessible and rules light. And exactly what you said, for a lot of them, they're not like these big terrifying things. So I think it's really great for a lot of people if they're like, oh, I've played a few games, but I don't want to sit and learn like a massive big rule book. I'd say a lot of your games are quite, have the option where you can come and sit and play. And this very much feels like one for me, which is why I was very excited to talk to you about it. So could
Yeah.
you give us an overview of the game? So what is the theme? What is the setting? If people have never heard of Insurgent, how do you describe it to them?
Right. So yeah, Insurgent is a game about toppling tyrants and looking good while doing it. It's
Great.
a game of rebellion and panache. So I want people, when play it, to feel that they are empowered to fight against oppression.
Mm-hmm.
That comes from a place. I'm from Brazil, so a third world country, and usually there are portraits of a rebellion from people from like third world countries. They're expected to be like, okay, we're oppressed but suffering in rags, or
Mm-hmm.
just fighting with the bare minimum, just like this mass of people that are not empowered really. And there's this bunch of the white folk heroes on the front and
Mm-hmm.
the background of this mass of people that are just like not protagonists. So I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
to to create a game that allowed you to fight, but allowed you to feel good, to like be awesome while doing it. So there is no predefined setting. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
there is a table for you to roll with inspirations for settings that go
Mm-hmm.
from like fey folk fighting against the industry, or things like inspired by Matrix, like we're living in a
Mm-hmm.
reality dominated by robots or artificial intelligence, to time travelers or anything like that. But the
Mm-hmm.
main theme is rebellion against an oppression by
Mhm.
people that have the power to do so, you know.
Amazing. I love that it is so like you can have any setting you say, like you say, you can make it in the past, you could make it fantasy, you could make it future, or you could make it like political modern times, that you could do any kind of thing you want with it, which is really, really great. So one thing I found really interesting about the game is it was there's three things that I do, and lots of things, but the three things I really want to talk about is the game doesn't use a GM, and it also can be played solo or co-op. And I thought that was incredibly flexible. So could you talk about how the game achieves all that flexibility with such simple mechanics?
Right, of course. All of my games are either GMless or have a GMless option.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very big believer in GMless games, and this could be a topic for a whole hour of conversation. But
Okay.
briefly, what I believe is that when you remove the preconception of an intelligent being that will be present in the table with
Mm-hmm.
acquired knowledge that does not belong to the game itself,
Mm-hmm.
which is the GM. If you
Mm-hmm.
remove that preconception, you have to provide, as a game designer, the tools for your game to be run without it. So there
Mm-hmm.
is in almost all games that have a GM, there are moments that it says, "Oh, the GM will decide when this applies. The GM will make sure that everyone has a chance on the spotlight. The GM will drive the story forward and say what happens next." So if you remove that, I have to provide that. So I think GMless games make me a better game designer, as well
Mm-hmm.
as they remove this imbalance of authority and responsibility on the table that I think brings a lot of the tension when you go for like the subreddits of
Mm-hmm.
RPGs and GM advice. They would disappear. 85% of them would disappear if they play GMless games. So I'm a big believer
Mm-hmm.
from a designing standpoint and from a player standpoint on GMless games.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to do so, to achieve that, we have to rely on oracles mostly. Oracles,
Mm-hmm.
for those that are not familiar, are a series of tables or dice rolls or other mechanics that allow you to substitute or to emulate what a game master would do. So instead of asking a question to the GM that is not there, you ask a question to the oracle, you roll some dice or flip some cards depending on the game, and you get an answer. Perhaps this is a very straightforward answer, perhaps there are some prompts, abstract words that you have to interpret and connect to the scenario you are currently in. So
Mm-hmm.
in Insurgent, I used one of the latter, an abstract form of those, for
Mm-hmm.
more general descriptions in case you want to describe a scene, a person, their intentions, their motivations, or things like that. But also, I provided a bunch of other tables that you can use to create NPC scenarios, your own mission, the challenges you're going to face, and everything that you need to play without preparation. So, because of course, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a game master, you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
prepare an adventure for yourself. You just sit at a table, open the book, and you just start rolling on the tables and creating the story as you go. So that's my preferred way of playing, because
Mm-hmm.
actually most of my game design choices come from my own limitations. So I have a very hard time absorbing lore. So for example, if I would
Mm-hmm.
play something like World of Darkness that has like
Yeah.
those 100 pages of factions and clans, I can't absorb that. So I my games tend to be of those emergent narrative that you
Mm-hmm.
construct the lore as you play, because that's how I feel most comfortable with. And
Yeah.
Insurgent is no different.
I think that's very relatable to a lot of people as well, and I think it's a barrier for some people wanting to play games, is that I don't have the time. I'm busy, and maybe I have a job. This is my hobby. I only have so many hours of free time. I want to spend it playing games. I don't want to spend it doing homework for my game.
Exactly. Yeah,
Um,
that's how I felt when I
mhm,
started playing games, and I didn't have the money to buy the books That was one of the first things. I can't buy
Mm-hmm.
like what, $300 in books and then read 900
Mm-hmm.
pages. And okay, but is there any other way that I can enjoy this hobby? So that
Mm-hmm.
was a big motivation for me, and it's still today. I think with like this book, Insurgents, like 22 pages, and I think I've been watching. A friend of mine translated the game to Portuguese and played on YouTube, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the story that he created, the world that came up with a bunch of random dice rolls on the tables, it was very engaging, very evocative. So I said, you know what? There you go. There's your lore. You know, it's just a bunch of tables and off you go.
Amazing. So in the game, we're going to be rebelling against oppression, against tyranny. What are the actual rules like? So we've talked a little bit about how we use oracles, but what's kind of the core resolution mechanic in the game?
Right. There was indeed the major inspiration to write this game because
Mm-hmm.
I had this idea for the longest time of having a game in which the amount of description you give to your action
Mm-hmm.
translates to how well you can perform on the dice roll. This is not an
Okay.
original mechanic, by the way. This is
Mm-hmm.
the first time I read it was on Wushu RPG, which is now a free RPG about wuxia and kung fu and high action
Oh,
kind
okay.
of games, which is very suited to this kind of mechanic. The more over the top your description of your moves, the
Yeah.
better your chances to succeed. But when I read it, I can't help when I read a game, I always start changing it in my mind. How would I
Mm-hmm.
do it different? Because that's my game design brain never
Mm-hmm.
turns off.
Okay.
So I read it and I said, you know what? I like it, but there is a little bit of crunch that I don't think I would need. And more specifically, I had reports from people that played games like that. For example, Exalted and Feng Shui that use similar mechanics, that it can get very tiring very quickly because if you're always going for a rich description of every action you have,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I just want to swing my sword, please give me a
Yeah.
break.
I want to stab it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the game system would penalize you if you did that because then you would have
Mm.
lesser chances of success. So I wanted to address that. And I was listening to a podcast called My First Dungeon, and
Mm-hmm.
they were playing Die, the role playing game that
Oh, yeah.
uh, Grant Howitt and team. I forgot the name of the
I have
publisher,
it here,
Roy
actually, I
Ruckard
think.
and
Rowan
Deckard.
Rook
It's
and
art.
Deckard. This
Yeah,
game.
this game.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this big boy.
Hmm. I've had them on the show before, so if people want to learn more about it, you can go back and listen to it. But yes.
It is pretty good. So I was
Hmm.
listening to it, and they were giving like those rich descriptions of their first fight they had, like the coolest moves because it was the introduction of the characters. And then I was reminded of this idea of mine of trying something with this mechanics. So I tried to tackle it, and I came up with a sort of a balance. So sometimes when you don't want to narrate a very rich description of your action,
Hmm.
okay, you're gonna get a lesser die, but you have more
Hmm.
chances of getting a lower result. But you get a spark token, which allows you to spend it later on the game to do
Okay.
something special. So it's pretty much you're trading a moment on the spotlight now that you don't want. Just I don't want to be on the focus right now for a
Hmm.
chance later on to make a big impact on the story, spending this that spark token. So you're kind of you're not penalized for
Hmm.
letting go of a rich description every now and then.
Hmm.
And so that's what I do. If you give a simple description, you roll 1 to 20. If it's a little there, if you add a second element, you roll
Hmm.
2 to 12. If you 3 elements, 3d8, and 4 elements or more, 4 to 6. And you're aiming to get 10 or more. So it's a very it tends to success. Most of my
Yeah.
games are very leaning towards success. That comes from a history of me rolling very badly on my games, on my
Yeah.
frustration or failures. And even
Yeah.
then, the game states clearly that a low roll, you don't roll for success or failure. You roll for the consequences of your action. So everything
Okay.
you describe happens exactly as you described it. But if your low roll, if your roll is low, you get what you want, but you wish you did it. Something, the consequences of your action are
Yeah.
so bad that you prefer that it didn't happen. So it takes a
Yeah.
little bit off of the pressure of a high stakes role in a game
Yeah.
that is supposed to allow you to feel empowered. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that sounds really great. So, for example, you could be like trying to access a door or something, like unlock it, and you managed to do it because your roll failed. So maybe it was so noisy, it's called, all these people to you or something. So that's
Right.
nice. So
Yeah.
it's going to move the story forward. It's not going to go, oh, you can't do that, because
No,
sometimes that
never.
feels like, okay, what now? And it feels like it doesn't stop this further story. That's
Yeah.
awesome to hear. I love that. So you mentioned it's kind of, what other rules and mechanics do we have in the game? So we've got that core kind of mechanic there. We know we can use oracles kind of for direction and guidance, when normally we'd look to the GM to do that. What other things do we have in the game to consider?
That's pretty much it in terms of mechanics, and it was
Yeah.
a very deliberate choice that to
Mm-hmm.
have a single core mechanic, and you don't have any numbers attached to your character sheet or
Okay.
to enemies or anything. Everything is determined by the narrative, the fiction. So
Amazing.
did I defeat the enemy with my roll? I don't know. Do you think so? Perhaps. If you're not sure, you can ask the oracle. There is a yes or no oracle, and you roll the die, and you can ask, "Is the scene over? Is there anything left to do?" And you roll the dice, depending on the likelihood that you think it's yes or no. You can adjust the roll for that, and off you go. Is my mission done? Have I achieved what I need? You can feel it in the fiction and decide it, because there's another problem that sometimes other games, including my games, I'm not a part of it, that sometimes the fiction has ended but the numbers haven't. So you see that like in combat, the combat's technically over, but there are like two guys hanging with 3 hit points each. You're just like, okay, let's be done with it already. So I very purposely left in this game the decision to be made by the fiction. Like, I think we achieved what we wanted from this scene, let's move on. What I liked to do was provide support for the narrative bits, like giving a rich description for your actions is not something that can come naturally most of the times, and perhaps even if it does, you kind of repeat the same 2 or 3 descriptions for every action you have. So I gave a list of things you can add to your description to make it richer. So for example, using the environment around you, bringing in a flashback, some part of your story or your past, and giving those big anime moments, and you resort to something that you heard or listened in the past, focusing on a particular equipment or gear that you have, focusing on cinematics like camera angles, movement, zoom, slow motion, and things like that, riffing off of the actions of your friends and colleagues. So combining actions, you jump and you leap and the other person throws something in the air and you hit it with it, you know so there's a list of things you can add as elements, and there's also a list that can be treated as a table for costs and complications when your role is not that good. But that's another thing that happens with games with partial success, such as PBTA games, that 7 to 9 results that PBTA games usually have can be a little taxing on the GM, or in this case on yourself, that you have to get what you want but also introduce a complication. So there is a list of costs you can like resort to inspire you on how to complicate the scene if you don't get a full success.
Okay, Great. Well, I'm imagining now if you're playing this game solo, those tables and prompts are going to be really useful to you when playing the game, just so you have that inspiration, something to bounce off. How different is the game? Well, I imagine quite a bit, but how different does it play being solo versus cooperative with other people?
That's a very interesting question. Most of my games, as I said, can be played both ways, but some perhaps the mechanics remain pretty much the same, but I
Mm-hmm.
think the dynamics especially change quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit. And what I mean by that is that sometimes oracle roles are replaced by a nice conversation with your group. So
Mm-hmm.
you can, instead of asking the oracle if something happens, you can horizontally discuss, hey guys, what do you think should be an interesting consequence here? And when remove the game master, usually you remove together that innate feeling that we have that we need to challenge authority, even if the GM is not on an adversarial position. If you see that person as someone that is responsible for placing obstacles in front of you, you kind of have this mindset that everything that I have to do is supposed to overcome those obstacles. So you kind of optimize your choices to get the best results as possible. When you remove that and you're playing a group, suddenly the necessity of overcoming obstacles is second to the idea of creating an interesting story together. So perhaps people are riffing off each other on ways that they can fail, on ways that they can complicate their lives simply because that would lead to a more interesting story. And this is a dynamic that I see happen naturally when playing cooperative games. It just, oh, perhaps I don't get this at this moment. I will stumble and my sword flies around the other corner of the room, and then hey, you're there. How about you try to run and get it? Oh, okay. And this prioritizing of a story versus success, I think it's a bonus that you get, an experience that you get when you're riffing off on a cooperative game without a GM. So that, and also the bouncing off of ideas, like when you get stuck describing something, you can simply ask around. You have tables if you're playing solo, but sometimes I don't know, guys, what do you think should happen here? And as long as you make sure that the person that is responsible for the action has the first and last say regarding their own things, it's a very nice exercise to get those brainstorming on what should happen next, interpreting the results of an abstract oracle as well. So yeah, I think the dynamics are very interesting and different from a solo experience, which on the other hand grants you the space to focus more on the parts that you are interested in, when you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to pay attention on sharing the spotlight or making sure everybody's having fun. When you're
Mm-hmm.
focused on playing by yourself, if you want to like spend 25 minutes detailing the fort that you're about to invade, that's okay. Roll on how many
Yeah.
tables you want, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a very different kind of experience.
For sure. With this solo game, I've been exploring that a bit recently, and I've had some people on that do solo journaling games, so people kind of write down their story. We've had some where people have made it almost like a radio drama where they say you speak it and record it. Do you recommend people kind of capture their solo game in a particular medium or way?
Oh yeah, for me, things that work that might sound out there, but voice messages on an app, a message
Mm-hmm.
app, uh, like WhatsApp or something like that. You just
Mm-hmm.
record a brief description of your scenes, and then you can listen back when you get back to your playing.
Nice.
And if you're brave enough, you can export those audios straight from WhatsApp
Mm-hmm.
to anchor.fm, and you have a podcast, an actual play solo podcast. How
There you
nice is
go.
that? And if you're not into journaling, because sometimes people think, oh, I'm not a novel writer, I don't intend to write a
Sure.
novel.
Mm-hmm.
You can use notes very efficiently for solo games without resorting to journaling. You can
Mm-hmm.
simply have bullet points. I would
Yeah.
recommend scene, column, brief description of the scene. What's the main challenge? How did it go? And what happens next? 3 bullet points per scene. And if you have to stop, because that's one
Mm-hmm.
advantage of solo games, you can play like 15 minutes on your lunch break.
Mm-hmm.
If you have to stop and you need to come back, like a quick scan of those bullet points gets you right back into action. You don't need to
Mm-hmm.
share those notes with anyone. It's just for you.
Yeah.
And but if I had the it's not even the talent in this case, but the physical condition, because I have a very big problem on my neck. It doesn't allow me to write by hand or draw. But I've seen people
Mm-hmm.
mixing their solo play reports with sketches
Mm-hmm.
on bullet journals and everything. It
Oh
doesn't
wow.
need to be like huge descriptions, but they sketch the NPC, or perhaps they sketch the scene and make some notes around it, and it makes for a
Mm-hmm.
very good memoir of our actual play. So if you're into
Yeah.
that, or arts and crafts, you can do something
Yeah.
like that, and the results are phenomenal.
That does sound great. I think that's great advice, not just for playing, obviously playing Insurgent, but also for just playing any kind of solo game. I think those points you said could be used for any of them. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Oh, no
With,
problem.
with Insurgent, for me, I'm thinking of so many one-shot, like one sessions I could run with people together because it's zero prep, simple rules. We'll all create it collaboratively, sorry, together. So that seems great for like a one session. It's like, hey, are you free tonight? Let's play a game. Obviously, it's great for that. Does it play well as a campaign? So if you wanted to play like an ongoing story with your friends, would this work for that?
I think so. One thing that I made sure is that I like to give players in my games a sense of what the end game
Mm-hmm.
looks like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I tend to see that traditional games are very open-ended, and then what
Mm-hmm.
happens when you reach a certain point of the game. So
Mm-hmm.
the purpose of this game is to have players performing a very meaningful mission and
Mm-hmm.
toppling down the oppressing regime they're fighting
Mm-hmm.
against. However, after you executed the mission, you you go for a collective reflection if you're playing in a group,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to discuss the outcomes of your actions. What did you
Mm-hmm.
achieve? What did you lose? What unexpected consequences did your actions have? It's not about winning or losing, actually, but understanding what you've crafted so far. Was it worth it? Was it enough? What happens now? So depending on the outcome, it's not, again, not attached to any number of any sort. You might feel that there's more to be done regarding toppling down the tyrants. Or you might feel that those particular heroes have done what they can do, and it's time for they pass the torch to somebody else. So the game concludes with each player's like summarizing their character's reflection on the mission and the state of the rebellion at this point. So, is your character hopeful for the future? They're perhaps they're a little bitter because of the struggles they faced. They Do they think they made the difference really, or they're questioning their path? Do they want to keep fighting because fighting against an oppression is hard. It's not like trivial, even though you are capable. So whether you feel like victorious or desolate, the game does not lie on the mechanical results of your mission, but on this collective
Yeah.
understanding of what you've achieved and the chances, the possibility of change that you've shown. So you might go ahead and make another set of characters for the same scenario that you craft, or
Mm-hmm.
you might just give these characters a moment to to relax, to reflect, and then they're off to another mission. I think it can be played for a while, actually.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. So speaking of, we talked a lot about the game. If people are listening and they're like, do you know what? Yes, I want to try this. I want to give it a go. Where's the best place for them to pick up a copy or buy it?
Right. So the game is available on my H store, h.io. So it's my last name, which is Capacle, Capacle, or capable with a C.
Oh,
H.io
yeah.
/Insurgent. I think it's already available on PNP Arcade as well. I've been putting my games there as well, and with good reception, which I was surprised. I thought it would be focused more on card games and board games, but role playing games are selling well there as well. So you can go there. And the game also, what I try to do with all my releases, since I live in Madeira Island, so I'm literally in the middle of the ocean nowhere. So it's kind of hard for me to offer physical copies of my games.
Sure.
So what I do instead is, if you buy the PDF, you get a net cost coupon for the print-on-demand version that you can buy at your
Oh, okay,
own.
great.
Right, so it's I don't get any revenue from the print version, because you have to pay for them, for Lulu in this case, to actually print it, and you pay shipping. So Lulu is good because they have printing facilities in the US, in the UK, Australia, France, and Germany. So they cover a lot of ground, and I don't have to stress with sending physical copies from a tiny island on the middle of the Atlantic to people all around the world. And it's a very fair price and a very good quality, I've been told. So if you go there and you get the game, you get a coupon for a net cost print-on-demand version of the game as well. So
Okay, thank you.
there you go.
And I noticed you do some community copies as well, for free as well.
I do.
On itch. Yeah.
I do. When I launch the game, I usually put a couple dozens of community copies, and for every sale I have, I add one more.
Amazing. Well, that's great. Thank you so much. Well, go check that out there if you've been listening and are interested, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. I've asked you a lot of questions about the game, but if I've missed something or somebody has a question they want to ask, how's the best place they can get in touch with you?
Right. So I have everything. All my stuff is under bento.me/Capacle, but I just recently purchased a quirky little domain, because my last name is kind of hard for most people to remember or to even understand when I pronounce it. So wacky.games. You get everything that I do on itch. On Drive-Thru, you get access to both of my newsletters. I have a newsletter on game design specifically, and a newsletter to spotlight Global South creators as well. There is all the storefronts that I have are there on this URL.
Perfect.
RPG apparel, t-shirts, and everything that I've done in the past are also there if you want to check it out. And that's the best place to find all my stuff.
Fantastic. That's great. So wacky.games is the place to go, one-stop shop.
It's quite a fun URL, right?
Yeah, well, it's easy to remember for sure. And my last question I'm going to ask you, which I ask everyone, is do you have any recommendations for any other kind of indie tabletop RPGs? And the rules are, it can't be one you've made, because we've just spent some time talking about your game, and obviously it's not D&D as well, so it can't be D&D.
Absolutely. So Jessica, if you allow me, I'd like to preface my answer with a bit of an introduction. I don't know if most people are aware, but when you're a creator from the Global South, there are some barriers that are perhaps invisible for people in the North, which are, for example, Kickstarter. Kickstarter is only available for 25 lucky countries in the world. If you're not born in the right country, you're out. You can't run projects with Kickstarter. Taxes. If you don't have a treaty with the US, which is the case in Brazil, every sale you have on like itch, besides the fees of the platform, 30% of everything you sell is taken for taxes as well. There are currency exchange problems with platforms, with PayPal and everything. There's visibility. Of course, we can't sell on brick and mortar stores. We don't go to conventions to shake hands of people and get and be known. And we are struggling to, speak in a second language, write in a second language, just to be seen and survive. I am a full-time game designer, and I gotta say, it's not an easy thing.
No.
And so we have to fight for every inch of space. So if you're listening to this podcast and you want to support people from the Global South, we're a very creative bunch. I assure you, you're going to see different perspectives, different ideas, different ways to approach game design, gaming, and traditions, and everything. It's a very colorful, a very broad world. I have more contact with Latin America, of course. So there is RPG Latam, and also Southeast Asia RPGC. So those are two big communities of creators, but there are more, of course. And what I did was I talked about it on Twitter. I published a thread. It was seen like 90,000 times and ended up as an article on Dicebreaker. So I thought, what can I do? So people started asking me, okay, where can I find these people? Because itch.io is not very good in discoverability. Sure. It's actually terrible in discoverability. So I put together a collection of games, of tabletop games by Global South designers. Now there are more than 400 games there. And if you are a creator from the Global South or its diaspora and you want your game to be included there, just shot me a DM. All my contacts are on wacky.games and I include it. So there's a lot of great stuff there and you can explore. Most of the games are in English. Some are in their native language, but most of them are in English. So they're accessible to a broader audience. And there's so much good stuff out there out of the axis of US, UK, and main countries in Europe. I think everybody gains when you check out these people. And if you give the platform, you can literally change a life of one of those creators. And I speak from experience. When I have the chances like that, Jessica, that you're giving me, it actually makes a difference on our living. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
No problem. So you're recommending 400 games today, which I think is the record on the show, the most number of games anyone has ever recommended at the end of their show. So check out the link there, that itch link that is on the screen now or in the show notes on the podcast. And there's 400. So I'm sure there'll be a theme or some sort of element that will grab you there. That's really great. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for your time and coming on and sharing your games with us. I'd be more than happy to have you back on again when you have another game you'd like to share, which I'm sure will be the case soon because you're very prolific. There are many games that you have done.
If you don't mind, as this is aired, I'll be having a crowdfunding campaign running right now. So
okay.
Yeah, so it's Nexalis. It's a bright fantasy RPG. It's about exploration, growth, camaraderie in a world of 1,000 isles. Also GMless and cooperative, focus on a hopeful, optimistic way of exploring a fantasy world. So it's like the opposite of dark fantasy. So that's what I call bright fantasy. It's on Crowdfunder. And if you want to check out, there will be a link of it on my wacky.games as well. You can check it out. It will be running until the end of July. So if you don't mind my plugging it.
Absolutely, plug away. So that sounds great. Yeah, go to wackygames.com to check out the link for that. It'll be running into July. That sounds really great. And with that, we will end this week's episode of Not D&D. Thank you so much for watching or listening. We'll be back next week with another indie tabletop RPG creator to introduce you to. Cezar, thanks so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.